Welcome back, guys. Welcome to Industrial Marketing Live. I missed you guys. Took a few weeks off just to reset a little bit, but really psyched to have Joel Klettke here from Case Study Buddy. Joel also is a professional copywriter. And I don't know, Joel, I almost don't feel like I could do you justice to introduce yourself. Joel's got like a killer presentation on case studies, but really it's going to be conversational, I think, in nature. And one of the things I want all you guys here to ask some of your specific case study questions. Like if you got one that you're thinking about pursuing, or if you maybe have one in the queue and you're like, I don't know what to do about this, go ahead and challenge Joel and myself, and we'll definitely try to walk you through some of that stuff. Joel, I want to give you a chance to introduce yourself and your company. Everybody here, by the way, I'd recommend hiring Joel. Joel's the best in the business of case studies, and I don't say that lightly. He's the most listened to podcast that I had for the Industrial Marketing Show by far. And so I just had to bring him on to just kind of talk about this in a little bit more depth and kind of give you guys some visual aids and also to go along. So with that, Joel, I'm going to turn it over to you, and I'm going to interject with some questions and just some random commentary. But I want to let you kind of just do your thing here and give you the floor. So go for it, man.
Cool. Well, thanks. Yeah, I mean, I think you did a pretty good job introducing me, so I don't want to spend too much time on that because that's not what people are here for. But yeah, I mean, my name is Joel. So I went out on my own in 2013 and originally was really focusing on content. I was writing a lot of blog content and ebooks and long form content. And then within a year and a half, had positioned myself, kind of transitioned more into conversion copy. And so looking at how do people buy and how do you convince people to take action and how do you motivate people to make a decision, whether that's to call you or purchase something or sign up or whatever that might be. About a year into focusing on that, I did some work for a company called WP Engine. And after that project, one of the people who sits on their board asked if I would do a case study for a company they advised. And I thought, well, sure, how hard can it be? I'll give it a shot. Well, turns out anytime you ask the question, how hard can it be, you're about to find out. And so it was through doing that project that my eyes were open to customer success stories and just how hard and complex they can be, how much opportunity there is when you can get them right. And so since then, Case Study Buddy kind of came out of that project. And so we've been around for about 5 years, just over. We've spent those past 5 years just doing one thing and one thing really well, which is refining the process around getting customer success stories, telling them, getting these done, and whacking a whole lot of moles along the way. So we have done hundreds of these in that time. We've done them for companies on the Fortune 100, all the way down to individual consultants, to some of the most sensitive spaces and markets on the planet, cloud security. You can imagine how tight-lipped people are about wanting to talk about having being breached. So that's an interesting space, but they're actually, interestingly enough, and maybe as a good kind of pretext for this, because I know that's one of the big concerns in industrial marketing, interestingly enough, by order volume, that cloud security client is our biggest. So it is entirely possible to do customer success stories in very sensitive spaces and to do them very, very well. And that's sort of what I want to talk through and share. So obviously, as Matt said, feel free to ask questions and get into the mix. Be aware though, having done hundreds of these things, odds are pretty good I'm going to answer one of your questions in the webinar. So I might just say, hey, we're going to get to that in a second, but we can get specific and we can explore. So I'm going to share my screen so you guys can kind of see, and we'll go from there. So I named this one today, How to Craft a Case Study That Matters and Won't Bore People to Tears. And industrial marketing, it's a tough space. People want to see these. They need to see these. They're a big part of not only the sales funnel, but the marketing funnel. And they can work all across the entire funnel, which is a blind spot a lot of people have. They assume, well, we're just going to hand these to the sales teams and they'll go off and do their thing. So I want to talk about not just, whimsical, theoretical, maybe this will work, but some brass tacks. How do you go about this? What are some practical things that you can take from this session and go and do today, this afternoon, to bring you multiple steps closer to actually getting these done? So let's get into it. Before we go any further, let's talk about why case studies in the first place. Like, why these assets? What's exciting about them? Why would I want to spend 5 years of my life building a company around doing just this one thing? For some people, that sounds like watching paint dry. But the honest truth is that customer success stories are some of the most powerful assets on the planet. So customers love them. There have been tons of different studies. I could pull out all sorts of stats and cite all sorts of different things because this is ongoing and evolving. But especially in B2B sales conversations, they're frequently cited as the most influential, or at least in the top 3 most influential types of content out there by B2B buyers. But more importantly, people don't just say that they love them and then, pay lip service to it. There's good data that shows people actually read these things. They don't just say, yeah, I looked at a case study. They really did look at that case study. So a few years back, DocSend did a huge study across 34 million different pieces of content of different types, different collateral. And they looked at how much actually got read, how much time was spent on it. And case studies, as you can see, absolutely obliterated every other content type in terms of completion rates. So they had an 83% completion rate compared with other sales content. That is a pretty massive advantage over things like white papers and spec sheets and all of these other things that we invest time and money into. Case studies actually get read. Well, that's important because they influence decisions. So even though the data surrounding this is a little bit dated at this point, so 2013, there have been lots of follow-up studies since, but 62.6% of US agency executives cited case studies as the most effective content for their lead generation. And then 77% of B2B buyers cited customer success stories as the most influential content they consumed. And I can point to, like I said, different studies and different things and different ways these get used. But if you take nothing else away from that whole section, just take it away that case studies work. For as skeptical as we might be, for as much as we might say all case studies are bullshit, or they're all these really fancified, your highlight reel versions of the truth, they still move units, they still influence decisions. And when you can tell them, well, it's like having a superpower. But the whole challenge is getting them in the first place. How do we do that? How do we get buy-in? You can't tell a customer success story if customers won't agree to be in it. So let's start at the beginning. Before you go asking anybody to be in a customer success story, before you write a word, before you bash a keyboard, before you approach anyone in your company about putting these together, you need a strategy. And that might sound off the wall because for most people, case studies function like happy accidents. It's like, oh, we had a great project, and oh, the client emailed me and they're really happy, and oh, they volunteered to be part of a case study. That's literally how some companies treat these, like happy accidents where all the stars align and they go, well, I guess we should turn this into a case study. When in reality, I believe you can make customer success stories inevitable. You just need to have a plan to make that possible. So what does that look like? Well, from a really high level, there are 4 things that you should answer before you spend a dime on doing a customer success story. So 4 things to consider. What's your goal? Why do you want these? And your goal might be, okay, we want to have sales collateral, but think about it a little bit bigger. What are your goals in terms of roles you're trying to influence? Industries maybe you're trying to penetrate? What part of your offering are you trying to increase sales of? Is there a geography you're trying to break into? Get specific about what it is you want these to do for you. Yes, from a high level, okay, close more deals, but that's very narrow thinking. Think more about the who and the what and the why from a business perspective. What are the business goals behind these assets? And when you know the business goals you have, you can start looking for stories that support them instead of just passively waiting for stories to come to you. So who are we targeting? Just mentioned that. How will we use them? So this is an odd question that we get sometimes when we're having sales calls with people. We ask, how do you plan to use your studies? And they're kind of pause for saying, well, we're going to give them to our sales team and then we're going to put them on our website. And that's the saddest part of case studies is a lot of people invest a ton of time and money and budget and effort to get them. And then they let them rot on a resources section of their website where they're never used for anything except those visitors who happen to go navigate to them. The truth is, and you'll see this kind of a bit later on, case studies can be used across the entire funnel, all the way, maybe not funnel, but buyer's decision, all the way from acquisition, right on down to customer nurturing, right on down to upselling, right on to bringing back churned customers. These have utility across the entire spectrum of sales and marketing activities. And then the fourth question is, who owns the relationship? Part of the reason customer success stories are tough to get is because nobody takes ownership internally over who owns the relationship, who makes the ask. In other words, who can the ask come from that it's not going to feel like a stranger swinging in for a favor? The more that your request for a customer success story feels like, hey, scratch our back, and you're like, I've never heard of you, I don't want to touch you, never mind scratch your back, the less likely you are to get that story in the first place. So 4 questions to ponder before you move ahead. And in terms of how you plan to use it, I want to just highlight this a little bit more. There are different ways to tell the same story. It's not just problem, solution, results, some ambiguous length, and ta-da, we've got a customer success story. You can very intentionally craft these stories to suit different purposes. A nice, really short format can work on everything from sending it along with an RFP as a single one sheet, to giving you social content that you can share, to cold outreach so that you've got this short asset that doesn't demand a lot of attention, to sitting down in pitch meetings, printing them off as leave behinds, tons of utility. Longer format stories can act as lead magnets, so you can gate them. You can offer some sort of compelling information that someone would surrender an email for. They can work as blog content. They can support SEO initiatives. They can be used internally for staff training. Here's what a great customer relationship looks like. Here's what our values look like, lived out in story format. They can be newsletter content. So think bigger about what customer success stories can do for you. They can go all the way from a teeny tiny pull quote being used as a testimonial to this multi-page examination of what a relationship looks like or what your product or service can do. And then video can kind of cross the chasm. So video offers the opportunity, especially with industrial solutions, to see the thing in action, to get a sense of what it looks like post-deployment. And so video can kind of bridge the gap between, but also work in all of these different areas. But if there's one cautionary tale I have is, don't try to do case studies in a vacuum. So a lot of companies go, well, it's going to be really hard to get people to agree to be in these. So why don't we just kind of huddle around our laptops and we'll write it up, and then we won't let them know we did it. We'll just push publish, or, we'll just tell the story from our side. And these are customer success stories, not you success stories. So a lot of things happen when you take the customer out of it. What happens, number one, on an obvious level, you risk some legal ramifications. They might not be comfortable with how you've presented them. They might not be happy about what you've disclosed. You are gambling with a relationship. Not a great idea. But the other side of it is you lose all of the rich context of the customer's perspective. Why did they choose you? What were their decision criteria? What did that relationship look like from their side? What went right? What went wrong? What surprised them? How did you pivot? All of that gets lost on the cutting room floor when you decide not to include them as part of the discussion. So yeah, it's more difficult to get them involved, but it's also mandatory if you want to tell a story that your customers will relate to, because otherwise it's all just an invention, a fabrication. And that's why we see so many boring, narcissistic case studies out there in the world, is because companies don't bother to take the time to make the customer the center of the customer success story.
Right. And also, like, you can't replicate your customers' words and how they describe working with you. And that's just something that when you can get their side of the story, you can use that. That's way more powerful than any way that you would describe as a company the relationship you have with the customer.
Yeah, I mean, you also lose an opportunity for advocacy. By making them part of the conversation, you give them agency and control in that relationship. And who's to say that they're not going to be excited about the work you've done together and passing that on? We tend to block our own shots with case studies. We get scared. It's like asking someone out on a date when you're in high school and you're like, oh, but what if they don't like me? What if they say no? All these different things. We tend to focus so inward that it keeps some people from even trying in the first place. And that's a massive loss. It's better to ask and be refused, because then you can make a follow-up ask, than to not ask at all. So what does a good candidate look like? This might sound like a stupid question, but I have done enough case studies and my team have done enough case studies over the past 5 years to know that just because someone's had a success with you does not mean that they're going to be a good case study candidate. There's really only 3 criteria to think about beyond the 4th one that I don't have here, which is, does their story align with your business goals? But Number one, they should have had a positive experience. Okay. This sounds head smackingly obvious, but it's happened more than once that we've gotten someone to agree to be in a case study. My team gets them on a call, interviews them, and they're actively pissed. They're like, yeah, I'm not really happy. We're going to be switching. That sounds outlandish. It's happened more than once. So make sure they have positive things to say. The second thing is recent. So just because they're your biggest customer or biggest client, if their success happened 6 years ago, that's going to be very difficult to get a nuanced, detailed story. So you want to be making the ask sometime within a recent window of the actual success so that they can share that experience. It's not lost to time. And then the third is relevant. So relevant to your business goals, relevant to your business, relevant to where the company is headed. So this is a dumb example, but for example, as a copywriter, let's say that I didn't ever want to work with a yoga instructor again, but all of my case studies were with yoga instructors. Well, the work you display is the work you attract. So just because it's a nice sounding story, if you don't want more of that kind of work or more of those types of clients, then just because it shows a success doesn't mean that it's doing you any favors. You might be attracting the wrong crowd with the story.
Right.
So in terms of getting buy-in, one of the things that can be really helpful is this concept of escalating commitment. So kind of warming up the lead to taking part, finding out who's willing instead of just going for the jugular and saying, hey, will you be in this big production case study? Finding little ways to gauge who might be willing. And this can look different in different scenarios. It might mean running, say, a quarterly or annual NPS score. And we don't really care so much about the score itself, but we want to see who our advocates are, who our 8s, our 9s. It might be going and looking at reviews that are already out in the wild. So has someone taken the time to review you on an industry platform or talk about your work? That's low-hanging fruit. That's someone that you can approach. Often it might look like running a structured customer survey. So asking them in a survey privately questions about their experience, about where you can improve. And you would be amazed. I've done this multiple times now. We do this as part of a service for clients where even within the survey, you just ask, would you be willing to take part in a customer success story? It's a yes, no question. And the number of, like, I did this for an agency last month and they got 7 willing customers out of a base where they were like, we're not sure anyone is going to put up their hand. So just asking the question in that context can be useful, but look for ways to escalate the commitment over time versus just, if you have the option, just going in for the jugular. So I'll pause there if there's any questions. We're about to get into kind of some of the nuances of getting buy-in, but anything on that stuff that
yeah, so I got there's a couple questions that dropped. I have another sort of way that I've used to get people to escalate in commitment that I've advocated here for people who've been on this webinar several times, which is, when you take the time as a marketer to go talk to your customers and try to do market research and ask them about their impressions of the product and stuff, you really get a good sense of like whether this person would be someone who would be willing to participate in a case study with you. And you can use that initial product research conversation as a springboard to go ask them down the road and say, hey, really appreciated your time. Seemed like you had a really good experience with us. I'm wondering if you would be willing to participate in a case study based on that. So you have context and timeliness and relevancy, especially if it works for your target market. And as a marketer, when you have difficulty accessing your end users sometimes in the industrial space, is a really good way to segue into getting a case study opportunity for your company.
Yeah, I mean, I think the thing too to highlight is like routinely we find that the companies who have the easiest go of this are companies who systematize feedback. So they have natural check-ins. They do have systems internally to pass information from an account rep or a salesperson to marketing. They share in the load of, checking in with the client, and they normalize conversations around performance and performance metrics. These aren't foreign concepts. I think especially a lot of people go, well, we're not sure what their results might have looked like. That's your fault. It's part of your job to make conversations around what success looks like and how implementation will be successful, and then to regularly check in with them. So much of a successful ask happens way before the ask ever does. If you're a company where right now, and this is where a lot of companies have to be a lot more honest with themselves, where you have frequent contact with the client through the sales process, and then after that it drops off a cliff and no one ever checks in with them or seems to care. that's an organizational issue that probably not only costs you clients, but definitely costs you opportunities for stories. So thinking critically about what kind of natural cadence of check-ins, how can we systematize feedback loops so that talking to our customers about performance and expectations is natural. It's not this weird out of left field thing.
So David had a question. I think you kind of answered it, David. You can let me know if if what Joel just mentioned answers your question or not. He was curious about when in the process is the time to make the ask. Is it like, and for in an industrial context, it would be like, after equipment is operating and they have results that you can point to, or is it contextual or relevant to even ask before it's even delivered, provided there's a reason to do so?
It really just it depends. There is no magic answer. I think where we will advise clients is you want it to be recent enough that the customer is still feeling the excitement of the solution. They've had a success. It's tangible. Asking too early can rob you of that. Like a lot of companies, they have this tiny immediate success. So in this case, it might be, okay, it's online, but there hasn't been any time to recognize a return or to recognize a new level of efficiency or whatever. So that kind of comes down to your product and your relationship, but you want to map it out so that you're in this joy window of yup, it's implemented, it's working, we're thrilled about it. Outside that window, a lot of the momentum is lost. Now you can plant seeds before that point. It's not a terrible idea to, even at the point of onboarding a new client, let them know that, hey, this is a possibility that could come down the pike, to say, we really love to do these joint feature stories with our clients. If this implementation is successful, we might be looking for an opportunity just to share the work we've done together. I'll talk more about how you can couch that, but you can plant the seed throughout the relationship earlier. There is also an approach that's really bold, and I don't advocate it for everyone or every space, but it does work for some people. And that is to have a case study clause in the contract. Ooh. This is a risky play because it usually will get redlined by legal. So depending on the size of the company, often they'll go, okay, we're going to take this out. But what that does do is give you a negotiating chip. So if they ask for a price discount later on, or they want some other concession, you can say, hey, we'll do that, but we want to put this clause back in. So it gives you some opportunity to have this sort of win-win relationship where they get something they want and you in turn can bring this back in. It does sometimes come across a bit presumptuous. So again, your mileage may vary, but that's the earliest I've ever seen it introduced. I think the bigger thing is when you normalize conversations around sharing success and what that looks like and showing an investment in, mapping this out together, then it doesn't feel as awkward as we're the vulture circling around this win that we now want to capitalize on. It feels more like a natural extension of the relationship.
Right. Cool deal. Good deal. Yeah. On the contract clause, that is very bold and definitely interesting. I mean, one thing that's very normal in the industrial space is giving discounts on CapEx for, large purchases. It's something, I guess, to look at for anyone here who does deals like that. But I guess, as Joel said, I would proceed with caution with that. I'm sure that could be one of the things that could sour a customer potentially when at the point of close. When really you want to get the sale more than get the case study, I would imagine. We don't want to jeopardize the sale for the sake of getting a case study on the back end of it.
Yeah, that's why I say it's not right for every industry, every space, and it is something to proceed with caution. Again, the worst thing that can happen usually is they'll redline it, out it goes, not a big deal. But proceed, your mileage may vary, try it or don't try it. I'm not the boss of you, but just some different things, different industries and different people have done. Cool. Carry on.
Yeah. Let's talk about getting buy-in. I'm curious because this is hard. This is hard on the, on the company side level when you go to your sales team or your president, and it's equally as hard on the client side level when you make the ask. So I'm sure there's two sides to this step, and I really want to cover it.
Yeah. So from a high level, what a no is, we need to understand kind of the anatomy of a no. What is really driving a refusal to be part of a customer success story? And typically it's one of three things or a combination of these three. So often it's uncertainty. We're not comfortable when we don't know what's going to be shared, Will we be put at risk? Will we be presented properly? Will we look foolish? All of these questions are going to swirl around because your client feels like they don't have a grasp on the ask or the outcome or what this might look like. The second one is inconvenience. So here it's, well, why would I take the time to do this? How long is this going to take me? What's involved? It's a self-protection measure. I'm busy. I don't have, I barely have time to clear things off my desk. So how am I going to possibly take part in this? And then the third one is selfishness. So this can be on the part of the individual or the company, but what's in it for me? Why would I help you? So with each of these different things, there's a way to try to counter it and a way to try to present your ask that can help with this. So where there's uncertainty, give them control. One of the things we advise every client to say all of the time is that nothing will be published without your approval. They explicitly tell their customers, you're going to have a chance to see a draft. You're going to have a chance to take anything out you don't like. You can ask for any changes you want, and we will make them on our end. So they're not going to have to rewrite this thing. You just let them know, hey, it's as easy as a thumbs up, thumbs down, or a request for a change, and we'll implement. So giving them control over the process and letting them know that nothing ever goes live without their express consent, that's really critical as part of the ask, making sure that they feel like they own the process and that they have control over what goes out. Where there's inconvenience, that's where you lead with the process. So, you can only say this if it's true, but your job, a big part of your job in doing customer success stories is to make the experience as efficient as possible to get the most out of your customer in the least amount of customer time. That's part of why people come to case study, because that's pretty hard to do. But for you, you just have to engineer your side of things so that you're taking the minimum amount of time. So they're showing them the steps. It's going to, what's it going to require? Well, a quick, 30 minute call. The next thing you'll see is a draft to review where you can thumbs up or thumbs down. After that point, we'll send you the finished design asset so you can use it internally or share it however you choose. But showing them what's to come takes the uncertainty in the process out of there and shows them, okay, all in, it's only going to take half hour to an hour of my time. That makes this a lot more palatable than this big question mark of, hey, how long is this going to take? And then with selfishness, if you can find some incentive, that's one way to show them what's in it for them. Now, this one I have to pause and say, you want to be extremely careful with incentives. The FTC doesn't really smile on undisclosed incentives, depending on what those incentives are. So if you're offering monetary incentives, or if you're offering an exchange of goods or whatever for incentives, it's not rocket science, but you do have to disclose that as part of the story. It's a single line that just says this customer has provided X and Y, but just something to be aware of. But often you don't have to go that far. It's a matter of showing them what the business case is, or what the broader opportunity is for them. For some companies, they might be attracted to the idea of the exposure of it, of being shown in a good light. That's where it's critical to emphasize they're not going to be painted as this damsel in distress, or they're not going to be made to look like they were this struggling company that you came in as the white knight. It's very important to communicate. We want to make you look great. We want to show this as a collaborative relationship. We want to put the spotlight on the great work you were doing. For some companies that will resonate. For others, it might not. So finding, again, what's in it for them. Maybe it's being exposed to potential customers. Maybe it's that you're going to be able to mention it at an upcoming conference that some of their clients might be at. Maybe it's that you'll bake it into campaigns that their ideal customers might be at. But if you can make a business case for it, that can be ideal. I wouldn't ever lead with monetary incentive unless that's the only possible way to get it done, just because it complicates the relationship. But looking for simple ways to make them feel thanked and welcomed. And honestly, sometimes it's as simple as letting them know, hey, you'd be making a big difference, and to make them feel like you are grateful for their time. Sounds a little bit hippy dippy, but that's often enough to get someone to be involved, especially if you've shown that they have control and it's not going to be an onerous process.
The great question I have from Dennis that I want to cover here. I also had a couple additional points I wanted to make on that slide, because I thought it was super interesting. When you talk about control, it also is involving the right people at that company. I think a lot of people here, the kind of people we're going to ask for these case studies are manufacturing engineers, production managers, and these are people who don't really know how to navigate a question like that. So I would say lead with enough empathy to say, hey, I would love to talk to your PR director or marketing vice president or anyone in legal just to help assuage any uncertainties or any concerns they might have. Know who to involve in the process and offer to help guide them through that so that they don't feel like they have to do that all by themselves. You can head a lot of concerns off at the pass by being proactive and transparent about that kind of thing. And then on the incentive side, I will say one thing that I've used in my career that has worked for a lot of mid-sized manufacturing companies that you do business with. It's hard for them to get good video content or high quality video. So if you're not able to right now, and it's going to segue into my question I received, but what I was able to do with some companies was just say, look, we're bringing a videographer on to film this because you're letting us do that. I will give you all of the B-roll footage. You guys can utilize that in any way, shape, or form for your own corporate promotional videos. We'll even do a little extra filming on the side for other parts of your business. And that is a really good way to sweeten the pot for those companies who are willing to do it, but also are hoping to get a little something out of it.
Yeah, I mean, the other thing I'll say quickly too is you can also provide some level of control by sending questions in advance. So you can say, these are the types of things we'd like to ask you, letting them see, again, what that part of the process might look like takes the questions out of it so that they know, okay, well, these are things we're comfortable answering, or these are things that we'd be comfortable sharing, and emphasizing that it's about their experience. You're not looking to disclose industry secrets. Part of the ask we'll often say, especially when we're dealing in sensitive spaces, is nothing sensitive needs to be shared. You have total control over what makes it to publish. So communicating those aspects. And one secret weapon in the fight too is to show them a sample of an already completed study. If you've been able to get some done before and you have one that you're proud of, but make sure it's beautifully designed. Make it look really, really good. That makes a difference. When they can see something that looks really polished, when they can read what it might look like, again, you're just taking away that uncertainty of what's the end product, what's the benefit. You can help them get excited about taking part in something like that. So showing them samples, they don't even have to be yours. They can be what you're shooting for and say, this is what we're trying to get to. This is the quality, that we're hoping to produce here.
So Dennis had a question about the current travel restrictions and workplace restrictions. How are you executing case studies, video case studies right now when you're able to capture them?
Yeah, multiple ways. So obviously, if we're doing live on location, the biggest thing is minimizing travel. We're not sending video teams around the world. We're not, having huge crews go in and do this. It's really about having the proper COVID, precautions in place. So we have a firm set of criteria that the on-site crew is expected to follow and signs on to follow. We are sourcing local video crews and handling all of the strategy from our side. So we're kind of sourcing and vetting a local crew that we believe can go in and capture, this for us, and we'll prep them and brief them. We're trying to keep those crews small. So where we can, we'll look for one-man crews who can set up multiple cameras, run a great interview, and then shoot the B-roll themselves at most too. So minimizing the number of people, sourcing local crews, having COVID waivers. For some companies, it's a non-possibility. So some companies, their locations are totally locked down, or they're not even at their locations. So, I mean, you can't squeeze blood from a stone. You can't ask people to open up shop and turn everything on for you. But being amenable to what their restrictions are. The toughest part of video live on location right now, at least for maybe non-industrial environments, is B-roll. There's no one sitting at their desks to film. There's no reception people to go, have coffee with and clink glasses. But it's about broaching it and showing them that you have thought about the current restrictions and you've taken some precautions to minimize or eliminate those. The other way that we're doing it, you can get inventive. It's just a matter of tempering expectations surrounding quality. We all carry around pretty amazing cameras in our pockets. So you can, for example, conduct an interview remotely. You can, ship them some gear or use the gear they have to interview them on camera via webcam or using their own smart device. You can have them go out to, make them a shot list and say, hey, here are the types of shots we'd like to see, and get them to grab them, to the best of their ability on their phone. Now you lose that whole professional video crew coming in. But it's you can get inventive with it. Again, we're subject to the restrictions of our time. So I'm not going to pretend that having someone self-shoot on a phone is going to be the same thing as a professional crew. But there are ways to get video done. The big thing is just, showing that you've kind of thought this through and coming with a plan, as opposed to being caught off guard if they say yes and then go scrambling to put this all together later.
For sure. Are we going?
All right.
Yeah.
All right. We'll keep rolling. So some alternatives. Let's say, you're hitting a no. What other ammo do you have to work with? You can anonymize the study. Okay. People think anonymous studies are like the death of a case study. It couldn't be further from the truth. Anonymization actually gives you a ton of bandwidth, because what you can do is you can use things like gender neutral pseudonyms or only use titles. You can talk about the industry someone is in, but when they have this blanket of knowing that they're anonymous, you can get juicy quotes and details that they would never share otherwise. And you can still include those. There's nothing saying you can't talk about the relationship, talk about the implementation, censor out the stuff that needs to be out because it's sensitive. But anonymous case studies can actually be freeing in a way. And I mentioned earlier that cloud security company, and the vast majority of the studies that we do for them are anonymized, because you're not going to get a federal credit union to go on the record saying we almost had a breach, or to reveal the internal workings of how they fight these things. But because we go in, you'll remember the very first section that I talked about, we go in with a strategy. We know the types of stories we need to tell. We know the types of things we want to highlight, the types of clients we want to put out there, the aspects of a relationship that we really want to blow out. And here's the other thing. In an industry where sensitivity is the norm, showing you honor that above your own marketing can actually be an incentive to take part. So showing people, hey, we write in all our anonymous studies, we're happy to anonymize this study at our client's request. That gives some safety for other people. When they see that and they see, okay, that's not so bad, it gives them kind of some incentive to take part as well. So an anonymous study is not the end of the world. Now, next to an anonymous study, it's far more complex from a potentially legal standpoint, but you can agree to gate it. So you can say, okay, we won't have it live on the site. We'll agree to only use it in these contexts. You can have a kill list of like competitors that you would not be allowed to send it to. That needs to be really well articulated through the organization. So it can be messy, but you can agree to gate them or only use them behind the scenes and not in a public outlet. That can be a means to get into a yes. If they're still like, nope, then let's say you've already produced the thing and legal swatted it down now at the last minute. Well, you can try to negotiate internal use only. So have these be fireside docs. I mean, you might as well get something for the effort that you put in. So these sort of fireside stories can become part of your employee onboarding material. Again, they can show what your culture looks like played out, what a happy customer looks like, what aspects of your service and how your customers talk about them. And here's a point I want to pause and make. Even should the worst happen and you get almost all the way down a case study and then a wild attorney appears and knocks it out from the sky, you've still had conversations with your client, learned about language that they use to talk about your solution and your team. If you've done your job right, you've still learned things that went well, didn't go well. So there can be a product development angle. So even though you don't walk away with the polished asset, you're walking away with this amazing handful of insights that won't just better that relationship, but can still better all of your other marketing. It's not this like either get the case study or the whole exercise has been worthless sort of situation that a lot of people look at it as. Last two, so you can ask for an exclusivity agreement. So this won't really work in this space, but let's say they say, well, we want to be the only person in this industry that you work with. In other areas, you can say, yeah, sure, no problem. You'll be the only legal team, lawyer's office we work with in Georgia. Or that can be geographic, that can be industry-wide. It's an option, not always a good one. And then the other one is de-escalate. So, I mean, if you've read Cialdini's Persuasion, if they reject a big ask, go for a smaller one, they're most likely to say yes to the smaller request, or more likely at least. So if they say, nope, we won't do a customer success story, then come back and say, totally understand. We were just so excited about this. would it be possible just to get just a little soundbite, just a 1-sentence soundbite? Now that sounds like a really easy ask, so you might still walk away with some social proof that you can use. So in the event that you get swatted down from the big one, maybe you can get an endorsement or a single testimonial. So that's that section.
Got a question from Dennis real quick. Dennis, you're just crushing it with the questions today, man. Thanks so much for asking them. So Dennis wants to know about the lifespan for case studies. Is there a useful lifespan? His experience says that anything older than 2 years has been generally ignored, but I wonder if you have a counter argument to that.
I mean, why are you dating your case studies would be my question. Like, we don't slap a, like, this happened on December or whatever. Companies evolve, offerings evolve. As the company changes, some things will be less relevant. As your target client maybe evolves, some things will be less relevant. But I mean, this brings up a great point, which is like, if you've had someone agree to be in a case study, presumably they're a happy client and hopefully you're going to continue doing work for them, update it. Schedule like, hey, a year from now, we're going to go back and find out what the impact has been. And most companies don't do that, but there's a huge opportunity in just updating and showing the progression of the relationship within the study. We haven't found, I would say, again, this is going to vary. We haven't found that there's like a hard shelf life where it's like it's older than 2 years and it will be ignored. But again, we're not dating our studies and we're trying to align with business goals. But I would say when your business goals meaningfully change, then maybe it no longer serves you in the same way. And at that point, maybe you rework it to support goals you already have, or you go again, hopefully you're acquiring new clients and having more successes since then. Because otherwise things will fall off the map. But it doesn't have to be like a blog post where we slap a date on it. A win is a win, whether it happened 5 years ago or today. It just has to continue to be relevant to who you serve, how you serve them, and what you offer.
Cool. All right, let's capture the story, because you do a masterful job rolling through kind of how to make this compelling and really get the story behind it in a way that's impactful.
All right. So your one job with your interview, with this whole process, I mentioned this earlier, the maximum amount of info in the minimum amount of time. That as someone who wants to do a customer success story, this is your North Star. How do I get the most I can in the least amount of time? In terms of making that work in the interview, so before, during, after, BDA format, that is the format all of our interviews follow. And you'll recognize this format if you've ever watched an infomercial. What was life like before your solution? What did the experience of implementation look like? What happened after? And I'm not going to go through. Normally, I break out a lot of specific questions that are great to ask and all of that. But for the sake of this webinar, just some things to keep in mind. When you're talking about the before, some of the critical things you want to capture, because while you got them on the phone, you might as well get some good intelligence. What were their must-have decision criteria? Like pretty much everyone, when they go B2B solution hunting, has like even an unspoken list of like must satisfies. Ask them what surprised them about the process, for good or bad. Ask them about what implementation looked like from their side. Was it as expected? Ask them about the old way of doing things and who they'd worked with in the past, and what made it, here's a question, a phrasing of this question that I really like. What made it obvious that the old way of doing things was no longer ideal? What triggered this? That gives you intel on the sales side to start crafting campaigns around that. So thinking about the before, and then when you get into the during, again, you're asking about the experience and those things like what surprised them, what did that look like? Did it meet expectations? And all of that. And when you get to the after part, the really important thing is, especially in prepping for the interview, and this is where if you're gonna, we don't always send the question set ahead of time. And to be clear too, we don't just have a question set that we robotically read off of and go like, okay, question one, what was going on? Like that's going to make for an absolutely horrible interview. It'd be very robotic. You're not going to get the insights that you want. But when you're asking about this after phase, give them homework ahead of time. Like if you plan to ask them about particular performance metrics or particular outcomes, let them know which ones before the call so they can go and get that data, so that on the call, their answer isn't, oh, you know what? I don't know, but I can get that for you, because I can promise you like more than 50% will not go get that for you. So give them homework ahead of the call. If you emphasize nothing else, emphasize the outcomes that you want to talk about. And this is actually something that we're doing increasingly as well, is at the point of making the ask, we disambiguate by saying, these are the outcomes we want to talk about. These are the things we want to feature. And the way that we use the language used to describe those outcomes always makes them look good. How you improved your efficiency and now you're doing X, Y, Z. This part of, we get very specific about what we want to focus on, because that takes out the question mark of what are they going to focus on.
Right.
The interview flow, and I'm just going to kind of leave this to, again, I'm doing this from a very high level today. But if you're an amateur interviewer, a good interview is not you robotically reading questions off a piece of paper. Interviewing is an art. There's a reason we record these things, so that you can be present, so that you can transcribe them after the fact. Your job is not to be an interrogator. It's to be curious. And your number one job is to turn the person you're interviewing into a storyteller. You are not interested in their opinion, you're interested in their experience. And so you ask questions that are not, for example, yes, no, was it an experience? Yes. Okay, that's totally useless from a storytelling standpoint. So that's why you ask questions like, what made it so frustrating? What made you consider making this decision? What was it about us that, made you feel confident we would be the right fit? What aspects of X, Y, Z? You want to use these open-ended questions. When someone answers you, don't be afraid to ask why. So why were things that way? Or what did that look like for them? Or what did that mean to them? And don't be afraid to use repetition. If someone gives you an answer that's almost there, but not quite what you were looking for, don't be afraid to ask the same question, but a slightly different way. So we've all had the experience of being in an argument, and then like 2 days later, we're having a shower, like, I wish I would have, you come up with the perfect comeback just 2 days too late. In an interview, as the interview progresses, you ask kind of softer questions in the beginning to acclimatize them, get them comfortable. But it's not a bad idea to revisit some of the critical questions right at the end, because at that point they're rolling, they're in the guts of it. Now they're feeling comfortable. So you might get a better answer to some of those more sensitive or touchy questions if you bring them back near the end. The third thing I'll say is the best interviewers I know are not necessarily the best at talking. They're the best at shutting up. They know how to let silence uncomfortably hang, because these people, you need to recognize, are nervous too. To them, they want to give you a good answer. They don't want to look foolish. They don't want to put their foot in their mouth. They might pause before giving an answer. And the worst thing you can do is just jump in and go like this or like that. So you want to be very cautious about talking over them or getting too nervous and answering the question for them. So that's kind of how the interview should flow. And then the last thing I'll say on this before we get into the actual creation part, ask one question at a time. Don't use compound questions where it's like, can you tell me about why that was important and what it looked like? Just ask one of the two, because trying to seed two ideas, inevitably they'll gravitate to one and answer the other not quite as well. So that brings us to creating the study.
Got a quick question from Craig here. This is an interesting one. I want to see what your opinion is on it. Do you have any suggestions for questions to ask if what you sell is viewed as kind of a commodity? Is there any way you can try to draw out some of the ways to decommoditize, I guess, that product or that solution?
Challenge the choice. So say, why not use X other solution for this? Why not try to do X, Y, Z? And you'll start to get their reasoning and rationale for choosing you in a commoditized landscape. You'll start to get them talking about, what it is that drove them to make that specific decision for you. I love for commoditized spaces, I love asking about decision criteria, because it still exists, even if it's, price point, and maybe it's only price point, but that's where you have these other questions about the experience. People, different things certainly feel commoditized at this point, like blog writers. There's like 1,001 blog writers like on the first page of Fiverr, and then 1 trillion on the rest of the 9,000 pages. But guaranteed, each of those different writers, when you ask their clients what they loved about the experience of working with them, they might pull out different things. So even if the offer itself or the product is commoditized, what does the relationship that surround it look like? What was special about the way that you engaged, or what was satisfying about the way that deployment happened? I still, everyone's got to put gas in their car, but I still go to, for me in Alberta, I still go to co-op to do it. Why? Parts of the experience, right? Certain benefits I get that I don't get somewhere else. So you want to uncover those things. And so questions surrounding the experience, questions that challenge the choice, those can be illuminating in terms of finding some sort of angle or something interesting to hone in on.
Got a few questions that just flew in, some based off of your answer there, Joel. So one was about the video interviews. And so someone asked whether the interview style or process is different via Zoom as opposed to maybe in person. Are there any different tactics or tips that you execute?
Yeah. Interviewing for video is hard because depending on your process, if you're trying to simultaneously discover and document the story at the same time, it can be very hard. Like a great video, ideally, you don't want it to come across overly polished, but you don't want it to meander in 1,000 directions. Like you want to capture the best of the best stuff on video. So at times, where feasible, we might do a pre-call that's only audio ahead of the video, map out the story, and then go in with a much tighter set of focused questions for the video portion. The other big challenge with video, it just comes down to the quality level you want, right? For us and for some clients who want a really polished professional end product, your interviewer either needs to know how to both listen for the quality of their response and things like background noise or a train or a dog running around, or you need to have a second person there whose only job is to listen for that and optimize the output of the video. I think the processes can look very similar. It just depends on what you want your end product to look like. We don't have time to break it all apart, but there is a certain quality to even though they're not these very polished video presentations, there is a certain truthfulness to the raw aesthetic and the unpolishedness of an engineer kind of saying it exactly their way. But the other thing too is, you also want to make sure that whoever you're going to interview is the right person to be on camera. If they are very soft-spoken, if they aren't very passionate, if they don't articulate well, then you might try to get someone else within the organization who is more like that to talk about it. So there's a lot of considerations, but the big one is just, in some cases, you might want to do a pre-call to capture the story and then use the time on video more to explore what you know is already there than to try to uncover it.
Cool. This is kind of the prestige of the presentation, so I want you to get through it. I have questions, David and Alan, that I'm going to ask after you finish with the creating the study. Yeah,
we got two more sections, creating it and then promoting it. And again, I've kind of scaled things down a little bit for today just to allow for more questions and time to kind of explore, but I hope this will be valuable to you. I was trying to think what's like the core central thing, because we could spend all day talking about calls to action and design and headlines and how to present it, and like we'd never leave the call. And there's years and years and years we've spent trying to fine tune these things. But I wanted to give you guys something really actionable that everyone here can think about and implement, regardless of the length, the format, all of that. And I want you to understand, if nothing else, it's not just problem, solution, results, fill in the blanks, ta-da, we're done, okay? Each section you can make better by just adding one additional consideration. So typically when companies write about the problem, they say this thing was going wrong. And that's the end of it. And when they write about the solution, they tend to just say, we did X, 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 here's the specs, we're done. And so it's like this bullet point list of like, here's the stuff we did, that was the solution. And then when they write about results, they tend to go, here's the big sexy KPI that they achieved. Thank you very much for coming to my TED Talk. And that's the end of it. I want you to rethink that approach, because it loses. That's why we see so many of these being very shallow, hard to believe. They feel narcissistic. So I want us to rethink this and go, all right, well, the problem, it's not just a problem, it's tension and stakes. And so you want to introduce the hero, and you want to talk about what was the result of getting this wrong? What was at stake here? Like, what would have happened if they wouldn't have found a solution? And then for solution, you want to talk about the what and the why. So not only what you did, but why that solution. How did you think through it? Why was that the right way to go? What did that look like in practice? Take it one step further, not just the bullets, but here's the why. And then the results, you want to talk about the impact. So, okay, it's great that they saw an efficiency increase of 200%. What did that mean for the business? What did that mean for the individual? What did that mean for that person's boss? And so we want to make sure that we're not just throwing stats at people, but we're talking about what was the business impact of those results, taking it one step further. And that's where I drew the line today, is I just said, all right, like if you take nothing else away, focus on that. And maybe I'll quickly go through putting it to use, and then we'll answer some more questions.
Yeah, go for it.
Okay.
Yeah, go for it. Guys, have more questions, throw them in, please. Joel is.
So we'll kind of wrap up with putting it to use. And this is a concept that we use at Case Study Buddy. And we've actually added to it since: nibble, bite, snack, meal. The same story told different ways to serve different parts of the funnel or the buyer's journey. A nibble might just be a single sentence testimonial. A bite might be a slide deck that you present live when you're in a meeting, or you append to an RFP, something very light, simple, focused, just the facts, not trying to tell an epic narrative. We're not doing the Odyssey here. We're just kind of putting it, tight little package someone with a low attention span can read. The snack might be what we call a snapshot, but other people, it's like the more traditional customer success story format. So here, it's just the facts, but a little bit more. You're bringing in a little bit of emotion. You're telling the story. And you'll notice, like, we bring in customer quotes. So with our sort of snack format, we'll have maybe a paragraph, a customer quote to support it on the problem, and then a paragraph and a customer quote to support it on the solution. The important thing is, make your customers' words the driver of the story. Make them have the last say. Let them tell the reader what the problem was. That's going to have a lot more weight than just you saying, here is the problem we wrote in to solve. Let the client articulate that. And then the meal might be this longer format where it's got that thud factor. Maybe it's 5 or 6 pages tops. And that's where you give meaningful amount of space, 1,500-ish words, to really dive into, especially in these longer formats. The solution tends to be longer. So really explaining the ins and outs, the tech specs. That's what you're giving someone where they're at the finish line and they want all the detail. They're almost bought in. They really want to sink their teeth into it. So just thinking about the use case and the scenario. And then I just want to leave you guys with ideas, hopefully inspire you to think about, again, different ways that you can put these to use across the buyer's journey. I've used the analogy of the funnel, even though I don't really think it exists anymore. But at the top, where awareness is low, you can use these as lead magnets, especially if you're talking about a hugely desired outcome or a very painful pain point. You can post it to social feeds, turn that interview into an audiogram, post the audio there, use a video and an ad, use that to generate interest, show the product in action. You can rework them into how-to or interview style blog posts. So take that same case study, rewrite it as an interview with, Gail Smith at X company, and now you've got a piece of content that works for SEO. You can print them off and use them as leave behinds. Just make sure that they're landscape instead of portrait. Looks much better. You can pull testimonials into landing pages. So top of funnel, different ways to use it. Middle of the funnel, you can share these in pitch meetings. You can add them to your client newsletters and say, hey, here's a win you might not be aware of. And by the way, maybe you've got needs at this point in time too. You can drip them out in an email series. If you have a nurture sequence that you do with cold leads or inquiries, you can equip your first contact. So that might be sales or whoever it might be with these that they can leave behind or talk through. And then at the bottom of the funnel, add in your points of friction. So when they're considering making a purchase, make that available, whether on the site or in person. Equip your sales team, justify an upsell. Tell a story about someone who made the decision to get the new and improved model versus the one that they're debating, and you might see similar behavior. So lots of different ways to use these, lots of different formats, and that's it. That's my spiel on case studies. So
that was so good. Did you guys like Joel? Or do you guys think Joel did a really good job? Because I think Joel's awesome at this. So Joel, man, thanks so much for that. So I got a few questions, including someone who does not believe in funnels at all, David. And so David had a question about, are there any differences between case studies for service-based companies versus like hardware-based? Is the approach different at all? What changes in your estimation, if anything?
They are different. I think it just comes down to, like, what does your prospect care the most about? In a service-based business, everybody cares about results. Does it do what it says on the tin? Like, that will forever be important. In service-based businesses, though, showing the context of the relationship, how communication was handled, what that looked like, what that kind of the squishy, touchy-feely parts of it, it's actually really important because people choose service providers not only for what they can do, but how they think, how they treat people, what their processes look like, what expertise they have, in the mix. So Whereas with products, I think you definitely want to put the emphasis on the outcome and the result. You probably want to do some work to kind of show why that particular product was the right fit in that situation. So where with a services business, it might be about the strategy behind what was done and why it was done that way.
Mhm.
With a product, it might be, here are the criteria that this really satisfied and the way that we made sure that it fit that criteria. So it can be a little bit more, brass tacks. But there's overlap between all of those, right? Even with a product provider, knowing that support is there to help you, or if they accessed and tapped into that, that might be important to highlight. So I'd be reticent to drop them like in completely separate buckets, but what you emphasize will inevitably be different, because what someone looks for in a product is probably a little bit different than what someone looks for in a service provider, whether that's the relationship, the criteria, so on and so forth.
For sure. And in the industrial, it's definitely consultative regardless too. So certainly, emphasizing that part of the process is definitely still important. Sandra had a question. You kind of answered this, but I'm gonna drop it for you anyway. So they sell CapEx equipment. It's hard to get actual numbers to show efficiency improvements. It's hard to show results. So what are some of the alternatives that you would recommend in trying to capture in that, telling that story?
Yeah, so number one, we have studies that have no metrics at all. We can do that because there are other aspects that are painful for companies that we can show we have a solution to. When we're doing work for service providers or agencies, for example, it is about that relationship, accountability, expertise, how they showed up for them, what that looked like. There are outcomes that will never have any real metric other than, like we've done studies where it's like, they help students get jobs, and it's like, okay, well, they don't have hard criteria on like how happy the student is in their job. They might at best have like a placement rate for the company at large, but that's not really the crux of the story. So there too, it's about what that looked like and how they built trust over time. And so understanding, before I get to some alternatives, understanding what your lead is nervous about or anxious about, or what's on that decision criteria list, should influence what you emphasize in the stories. And if there's something on there that's not just monetary, um, or metrics based, then you can play to that. Sometimes we'll look for proxy metrics. So we will often ask, for example, what would the equivalent cost be to hire someone to do that job, or what would they have had to spend elsewhere to achieve what they've achieved with that particular piece of equipment or service or whatever. So you can look for these proxy metrics with, okay, well, how much time has it saved you, or estimations and that kind of thing. And if you're going to use an estimation, that's fine. Just say an estimated, right? How it helps the company save an estimated X amount per year, and you can explain how they arrived at that within the study. I think the more specific you can be, the better. I think the other thing is, it's perfectly okay just to have a broad based, how it helped them maximize efficiency. If they believe that they've done that and you have a quote to support it, importantly, then it's okay. You don't have to have the very like hard edge metric. It's just about, what does success look like for the client, whether that's an alleviation of a pain, achievement of an outcome, and how can we couch that in language that is not dishonest, doesn't make a promise we can't fulfill in terms of a hard metric. But there's lots of ways to tell. And we have a blog post about this, how to tell customer success story without any metrics at all. And there's probably some more details in there that are escaping me right now.
I got two more questions, then I'll let you go on with the rest of your day. So one's on kind of angling or framing your case study. So Alan asks, have you seen any unique or successful examples of angling or framing case studies, such as from a first person perspective or something else that you don't usually see in the market that you found to be compelling or successful?
Um, there's always the debate of like first versus third person, right? And like, should we say we did this, or should we say ourselves as a third party?
Company did
And
this.
the truth is, even after doing hundreds of these, I don't have a firm answer. It really comes down to the relationship with the client and the culture of the company. My personal preference is for third party, because it kind of just feels a little more, unless you're an individual consultant, it feels like a more unanimous sort of team effort and a little bit more arm's length. In terms of angling, though, I mean, there's a lot of like the unique things happening with case studies now are in presentation. So a lot of like interesting design elements, or like interactive on sites, a lot of like the media, or like interactive aspects can be part of like telling a story. And that's where, like, if you want great ideas for customer success stories, go look at like the big budget pieces the New York Times does, or like look at how journalism, right? Journalism's whole existence is like, how do we tell a really compelling story? And that's part of what we're doing at Case Study Buddy all the time, is trying to think, how can we borrow the most interesting aspects of journalism, whether it's, interesting crossheads versus just problem solution results. Like, one of the things we do is we have problem solution results, but then we always have a subhead that's meant as a hook and meant to pull people in. Some other interesting things that you can do, that not a lot of companies are willing to try, are to bring in things like conflict and failure. So what did you try? What didn't work about it? How did you pivot? People don't put that in because, like, well, that doesn't make us look very good, but it makes you look real. And people get that in real relationships. Like, shit hits the fan and you want a partner that can tango when there's tax on the floor. So
Right.
I think that's the thing, is you can bring in those aspects to make stories more believable. I saw someone ask in the chat too as well how long a study should be. That 34 million study by DocSend, they found that case studies kind of were most optimal between the 2 and 5 page sort of limit. Now, that being said, a page is like, I wish they would have been clear, because a page is almost a worthless metric, because you can have a page with like teeny tiny font and a page with like,
Right.
just imagery. But generally, like, the argument that people don't read is like completely bogus. People don't read stuff that's boring. People don't read stuff that is not engaging. But the blanket statement that people don't read, I'm in the copy business, I can tell you it's patently false. Like, people will still read 20-page sales letters they get in the mail as long as they're interesting to them. So people don't read bad, boring case studies, but a lot of that whole people don't read can also be combated by how you design them. There is a reason when you go look at Case Study Buddy's site and you go look at some of our samples, there's a reason we have a cover page, and there's a reason that 9 times out of 10, there's a headshot and a quote on the cover page. That quote's carefully selected. That headshot's there for a reason. There's a reason we have sidebars, even on our shortest studies. It's like the lazy person's version of the study. How lazy are you today? Do you just want to scan the sidebar? Or are you going to read the story? We give them every opportunity to get the information with the mindset and attention span they have right now. There's a reason that we make pull quotes big. There's a reason that the presentation is the way it is. So the blanket statement of people don't read is just, it's patently false. People don't read stuff that's not interesting to them. But if you have a strategy, if you know your customer and what ails them, if you make a promise that's compelling with the headline of that case study, people will read it.
I don't think I could end this webinar or anything better than that. So you know what? I think I'm just gonna end on that high note. Joel Klettke, thank you so much for coming on. Guys, if you're still on here and you get this recording as well, hire Joel. He's the best in the business at this. Please go to Case Study Buddy and talk to Joel and his team, because they're awesome at this and they will make your next case study phenomenal. So Joel, thank you so much for coming on to Industrial Marketing Live, man. I really appreciate this. This was awesome. And everyone here says it's amazing. Thanks, great info, and you're the man. So appreciate you so much. Now I'll see you on LinkedIn, and just keep doing what you're doing, man, because you're just crushing it out there.
Yeah, cheers. Thanks very much. You guys are in a tough space, but if nothing else, I hope you guys leave with the notion that these are possible and they can be interesting and it can be done. If it wasn't hard, we wouldn't have a business doing them. So keep that in mind. It's not easy, and don't get discouraged.
For sure. All right, guys, we will see you. I'll see you guys 3 weeks from today. I'm going to have Khalid Saleh on from Invest, and we're going to talk about conversion rate optimizations for your website. And we're going to keep that really high level. So we're going to talk mostly about the pages on your website that really matter, case studies being one of them, I'm sure, as well as your homepage and some of your like deep product service pages where you really want people who go to your website to actually convert on them. Joel could actually probably give a lot of advice on that too, because of, he's a great copywriter. We'll talk about conversion rate optimizations for your website. So, thank you all so much for coming. Appreciate the fact you spend time with me every few weeks. I'll see you guys again 3 weeks from today. Y'all kill it the rest of your week, and we'll get you this recording and the slide deck out by tomorrow. All right. Thanks, guys. Thank you, Joel. Appreciate you.